Welcome in to One of One Sports. Today, so I watched the college football rankings show a couple days ago, right? And I was unhappy with the rankings. I thought there were a lot of problems, and I feel like a lot of other people do as well. And now you've got people out here talking about SEC bias or big brand bias. And then I saw a Josh Pate video, obviously the biggest college football show on YouTube right now. Probably the biggest voice in college football, if not one of them. And he made his case. He's not an SEC bias guy. He thinks the SEC is just the best conference, which is fine, right? And then he made his arguments about how their resumes are actually better, which when I'm listening to that, I have a hard time seeing what he's saying there when you talk about a team like Ole Miss. Yes, they beat Georgia, which is a great win, right? But how is their resume that much better when you look at the rest of their schedule? So I'm kind of having a hard time dealing with that. And just a lot of things that are being said in the video I had a problem with. So initially I was just going to make kind of a rant video. But then I thought it'd be better to be more level-headed about it. Let's, do a little bit of research, get some numbers, see what's going on this college football season, and then kind of formulate an opinion. So let's just dive right into it. To start off, just looking at the college football playoff rankings breakdown by conference, the SEC has 9 teams compared to the ACC's 4, Big 12's 3, Big 10's 4, and then the other, outside of that is 5. That's like your Army, your Tulane's from the American, your Notre Dame and Washington State's your Independents, and then Boise State, the leading group of 5 candidate right now. So those are your 25 teams. So you look at this, you go, wow, the SEC is 9 teams. So that means they would be far and away the best conference, which maybe they are, but I was skeptical. When I look at it, I think, okay, how come a team in the Big 12 like Iowa State and ASU don't get ranked at 7-2, or a team like who was I thinking of? Pitt at 7-2, who I don't even think is very good, but just there are 7-2 teams out there in other conferences that are ranked behind, these 6-3 teams like LSU and South Carolina from the SEC. Or, even a 7-2 team like Missouri, which I thought was weaker. And speaking about Missouri, that's the team that I think, because I think if you look at the other teams, you can see they clearly deserve to be ranked. But Missouri, for example, is 7-2. So here's their breakdown. So both good teams you played, both top 25 caliber teams at Alabama, at A&M, absolutely annihilated. And then your best win is against Vanderbilt, but this is Vanderbilt pre-bye week before that Alabama win. A Vanderbilt team which had just lost to Georgia State, a team that took you a double overtime, and if you guys watched that game, had every chance to beat Missouri. The kicker just couldn't make the game-winning kicks. That's the only reason you won there. You just versed an Oklahoma team that we know is not very good, an Auburn team, that was when you had Brady Cook. Both teams take you down to the wire. Defense has to make plays to win in both. Neither are good teams. To me, it is clear that Missouri is not a top 25 caliber team. So why are they in there? Is it because they're 7-2? I would argue no, because you look at a team like ASU, who's 7-2, and one of their losses was when their quarterback was injured, which it seems like Missouri's getting the benefit of the doubt for Brady Cook being out. ASU is missing their starting quarterback on a road game at Cincinnati, which they lose. Their only other loss is, I think, a 1-score loss to Texas Tech. So, they're not an 8-1 team, but, they're 7-2, and one of those losses without their quarterback, like how Missouri, one of their losses is without their quarterback in the Alabama game. So, and Missouri's not been competitive when they played good teams and has struggled with bad teams. So I don't really understand that. Same with an Iowa State. I feel like Missouri at 7-2 is getting the nod over other 7-2 teams. People want to jump on that and say it's SEC bias. I don't know why it is, but it feels like you're getting credit for beating a team like Oklahoma and Auburn, who just they're not good teams. I don't care that they're in the SEC or that they might traditionally be good. They're not good. So Missouri, for example, does not deserve to be ranked, in my opinion. But you could argue that there's something else going on. Maybe you think it's preseason expectations of Missouri, whereas teams like ASU don't have that, and therefore the committee is it's an internal bias based off what they were projecting coming into the year. That's something I thought could be considered as well. Then another team I looked at, excuse me, is LSU, right? And LSU, you have the big wins are going to be the at South Carolina and Ole Miss. But again, looking at those wins in context, South Carolina easily could have won this game. And some would argue the refs stole it from them, right? But still, a win is a win and is a big road win. But again, South Carolina, I don't believe was yet as good as the South Carolina team they are now. But that's just an opinion. You don't have to agree with that. That's just my opinion. And contextualizing this is a close game that LSU won against a team that was not fully developed in controversial fashion. That's how I view that win personally. But if you're the committee and you're just saying we're not trying to bring any subjectivity into it, it's a big road win against a team we placed, in our top 25. That's fine. Good win. And then Ole Miss, of course, a good win at home in overtime. And again, taking in context, you didn't lead for a single second in the game. But again, you beat a team the committee thinks very highly of. That's fine. And then the losses, the A&M one, I don't think is that bad. The Alabama one is pretty bad. And then the USC one, there's two ways you can think about this, because I don't think the USC one's that bad, because I think evaluating it in context, basically USC was better at the beginning of the year, and that was a better team than they have turned into, right? But I don't knock them as much for that, but then I don't give them as much credit for South Carolina and Ole Miss. If you're going to give them the credit for those South Carolina and Ole Miss wins, I think they've got to be really penalized by a USC team that has been one of the worst teams in the Big Ten. So I feel like there's inconsistency there, and LSU's getting this benefit of the doubt that other teams don't get, and I have a problem with that. Continuing, though, I was like, okay, these are just two examples of SEC teams. Is the SEC actually better than these other conferences, though? So I decided to look into it. I just wanted to see how has the SEC performed this year against the other Power 4 conferences or, good teams. So starting off, I broke the SEC into quartiles. Quartile 1, top 4 teams in the SEC. Based off the committee's rankings, they're telling us who right now are considered to be the 4 best teams in the SEC. You can see Texas, Tennessee, Ole Miss, Alabama. Q2, also based off the committee's rankings. So Missouri, 9th ranked team in the SEC, falls into quartile 3 along with Vanderbilt, Arkansas, and Florida. And then you can see the final quartile. I did this for all the major Power 4 conferences. The Big Ten, you get 2 quartiles with 5 teams, and they're just based off, I should mention, after Missouri, it's just based off standings, right? Conference standings. Same thing with the Big Ten. So if 2 teams are, like wherever the break was that needed 5 teams, if you were wherever the tie was, like 2 and 3, you'd fall into that tier, if that makes sense. But so essentially each Power 4 conference I broke into quartiles, and then for the independents, like Notre Dame, because they're ranked in the top 12, that's a quartile 1 team, and then Washington State, who's ranked in the top 25, quartile 2 team. No group of 5 teams were considered, even if you're a ranked team. Tulane, Boise State, whoever else, none of those teams are considered in this. So I did this for each of the Power 4 conferences, and then I made a table for the SEC, kind of showing how they played against the other conferences. So we see here is your quartile 1 teams are undefeated, 4-0. This is Alabama, Tennessee, Texas, Ole Miss. But you didn't play any other quartile 1 team. So example here, Alabama beat Wisconsin. That's a tier 2 or quartile 2 Big Ten team. So they're 1-0 in the quartile 1, quartile 2 cross section. And what I think is really important in this chart, at least to me, is how do you verse against either similar teams in other conferences or theoretically teams that are higher, right? And what we see here is that quartile 1 teams didn't play any other quartile 1 teams, but beat all the teams beneath them, as they should. Quartile 2 teams, although they're 1 and 2 overall, they have 2 games they played against competition on their level or above, 1-1. That's Texas A&M loses to Notre Dame. Georgia beats Clemson. Do interestingly have a quartile 4 loss here that comes from LSU losing to USC. Then in the quartile 3, again, teams playing, you went 2-0 against your similar opponents. So that's good. But you're in then 0-1 against quartile 1 team, but that's to be expected. And then your quartile 4 versus quartile 4, you're 0-1. Overall, an 8-7 record, pretty good. 7. So you can see how the other teams fared against the SEC. So quartile 1 teams were 2-1 against the SEC, with a loss to a quartile 2 team in Clemson losing at Georgia. Then quartile 2 teams are 1-1 with the loss to quartile 1 Interestingly, quartile 3 teams are 0-5 against the SEC, losing to other quartile 3 teams, quartile 1 teams, and a quartile 4 team. So overall, this chart is just meant to show kind of a breakdown, give a glimpse of how the SEC is doing. But, excuse me, I think to showcase it better, we should compare it to another conference. I saw, why not compare it to the Big 12, right? The SEC is considered to get this benefit of the doubt SEC bias. The Big 12, on the other hand, would be the conference that I think receives the least benefit of the doubt when you look at how low BYU is ranked. At 7-2, ASU not getting in, right? So I thought, let's compare it to the Big 12, and we can see that the Big 12 is worse. They performed 6-9 in the non-conference, and if we look at the breakdown like you did before, they're quartile 1, 1-0 against other quartile 1. So that's good. That's BYU beating SMU. Quartile 2, though, you go 0-2 against other quartile 2 teams, and you lost to the quartile 1s as well. Then quartile 3, quartile 4 did not play any of the similar levels of competition and didn't perform great against teams better than them. So most of your wins here are coming against the teams that you're supposed to beat and not performing the best against the teams on your level or above you. And this would seem to signal that the Big 12 is not as good as the SEC, right? But here's the thing. I don't think I'm really breaking any news with that, right? I feel like most common sense people realize the SEC is better than the Big 12. And maybe you don't like recruiting rankings, but you can tell by the recruiting. You can tell by the history of how the SEC wins national titles. You can tell most years in conference play. You can just the talent makeup of these rosters. The Big 12's not recruiting. These teams aren't recruiting at a top 30 level for the most part. It's that simple that these teams aren't as good. But here's the problem, right? When you give these blanket statements like that. Yes, the SEC is better than the Big 12, but that doesn't mean that every SEC team deserves the benefit of the doubt over a Big 12 team. And here's what I mean, right? When we look at Texas and BYU, BYU has the better record. They have the better non-conference win. A win at SMU is, well, the committee ranked them 14th. Well, that's a little low in my opinion, which we'll get to later. But either way, a far better win than at Michigan, who is a mediocre team this year. So you have the better record, the better non-conference win, 2-0 over teams in the college football's top 25. Texas is 0-1 and was dominated by Georgia. Texas' next best win is probably a 3-point win over Vanderbilt, and then you've played nobody else. I mean, nobody good. Michigan, mediocre team. Oklahoma, bad team. Who else is? Arkansas is coming up this week. Would be like your second best win, and they're a mediocre team. BYU having a win against Kansas State in dominant fashion by 31, and a win against SMU on the road. Clearly the two best wins out of these teams. Best record overall. Scheduled a non-conference team to boost their schedule, and overall just a clear better resume. So is the SEC overall better than the Big 12? Yes. But Texas hasn't even played the good SEC teams. So why are they receiving the highest ranking out of any of the SEC teams? If you were to ask me, I'd be like, Georgia? Yeah, I'll give Georgia the benefit of the doubt. You went to Texas. You went home against Tennessee. You went to Bama. You went to Ole Miss. And you went 2-2 in that. That's or if they beat Tennessee, right? Right now you're 1-2 in that. But that's a brutal schedule. Oh, and then playing Clemson in neutral site, just an absolute brutal schedule. So if someone's like, I want to give Kirby Smart, who's won 2 national championships and is playing a crazy hard schedule, the benefit of the doubt. I'm like, yes, that makes sense. Or even some of these other SEC teams. But Texas has gotten a great break in their SEC conference play, beaten nobody, and is still getting that sort of SEC respect, getting ranked 3rd overall, which is just a bad ranking by the committee, just flat out. And then continuing with this though, because I was after breaking it down, I was like, okay, the SEC is better, so maybe it's not SEC bias, but could it be brand bias? And when we look at SMU and Miami and their schedule side by side, we see, okay, both. Let's say, what's their best win? And SMU's is a road win by 7 points at Louisville. Okay, and what's Miami's best win? It's a road win by 7 points at Louisville. Okay, so it's the same best win. Well, what they look like in the non-conference. So Miami played 2 cupcakes and then won a road game at Florida, who's like a quartile 3 SEC team. by dominant fashion. Okay. And what did SMU do? Okay, a home game against TCU, but see, both in state. So Miami's road games at Florida, obviously still in state. SMU's home game, TCU, still in state. About a quartile 3 Big 12 team, and won in dominant fashion. Okay, that's pretty similar. What's the record overall? Okay, it's the same record pretty much. Anything else? Well, SMU beat Pitt by a bunch, who was ranked. Maybe struggled a little bit against Duke, and then has dominated some bad SEC teams. So Miami, what have they done? They lost on the road to Georgia Tech, were upset, dominated some bad SEC teams, but struggled against Cal, Virginia Tech, and you could argue struggled against Duke. But overall, I'd say not a huge gap. Not a huge gap at all. I would actually argue SMU, considering their losses to BYU by 3 points, who's a top 6 team, and Miami's is lost to an unranked team and has played more close games overall than SMU. I would actually give the slight edge to SMU on this resume. But I think it's very, very close. You're playing mostly the same teams. You're looking at Louisville and Florida State and Duke. So mostly the same strength of schedule, same record, all that. Well, Miami's one more win, but you get what I'm saying there. But the gap is not 5 spots. There's Miami 9 and SMU at 14 just doesn't make sense, right? And really the only explanation I can think of there is that, Miami's got Cam Ward and they're the Hurricanes, and SMU, has been off the map for a while, and it seems like a brand thing. But to explore more, I was like, okay, let's look at Indiana and Penn State. And we look at Indiana, it's like, okay, what's the records? So Indiana has the better record. Now Penn State, strength of schedule out of conference, a little better with a road win at West Virginia. So I give them credit there. Then in conference play, Penn State, the win at Illinois, 21-7, okay. And then the win at UCLA was a little bit closer. Indiana beat them by much more. Both of them crushed Washington. Penn State at USC, who you won in overtime, but everyone in the Big Ten seems to beat USC in a close game. And then the road win against Wisconsin. So it's not bad. You beat who's in front of you. And Indiana crushed Nebraska, crushed Northwestern, crushed Maryland, crushed Michigan State. Close game against Michigan. So overall, neither team, I would say, has a great strength of schedule. Both have, for the most part, dominated weaker teams. Penn State, of course, loses at home by 7 to Ohio State. And maybe you're arguing they get credit for a loss, which I don't really understand. You were at home, and you lost to Ohio State, again. Now, you don't have to take into account the history. I'm just saying that that's kind of what we expect from Penn State. But either way, I would have to say, just look at their resumes, pretty similar. And obviously, Penn State got the nod 4-5. So it's not a big gap. But when one team's undefeated and beating pretty much the same teams, and maybe the committee disagrees, I think their eye test is better. But overall, same conference, undefeated, most of the same wins. I don't think you give credit to a team for a loss. So it'll be interesting to see if Indiana, in a couple weeks, goes to Ohio State, right, on the road, and loses by, let's say they lose off a game-winning field goal, right, 30-27, Ohio State walk-off. Is the committee going to move them above Penn State? That would be weird. I don't think the committee is going to move Indiana up after a loss, which is just strange because the resumes are strikingly similar, and a loss would actually be better than Penn State, even though I'm not for judging losses. But once again, the only thing to point out here is it's the brand bias. If Indiana had a Penn State logo on their helmet, they would be top 3 in the country. They would, but they don't. It's the same reason, and we'll just click to conclude. It's not SEC bias. It's just big brand bias. The reason Penn State's top 4 is because the Nittany lion on their helmet. The reason Texas is top 3. The reason Miami's ahead of SMU. The reason Ohio State gets credit for, or doesn't get knocked for the Oregon loss nearly as much as Boise State does, despite the Big Ten clearly not being some brutal gauntlet of a schedule, right? Despite the reason Boise State's still at 13, even wins against UNLV and Washington State, 2 solid wins, and their only loss is a walk-off field goal to the number 1 team in the country, they still can't move up. It's the reason Colorado's ranked 17th and ASU's unranked, even though they're 7-2 in the same conference, one of ASU's losses being with their quarterback out. It's the committee is favoring big brands, and I don't know if this is a financial thing. Maybe we make another video analyzing why, but I would speculate, me personally, and maybe I'm just being too optimistic, it's just an internal thing. You're watching more of the big brands, and just in your head, it's hard to get through, oh, we should rank BYU above Texas. Oh, we should rank Indiana above Penn State. But that's their job. And to sum it all up, I think they're just doing a bad job not leaving their own biases aside of what has been and what they, the sticker on the side of the helmet seems to be having too much of an impact on these college football rankings. And hopefully it all plays itself out. Indiana's going to get their shot. BYU can still go undefeated, and hopefully these teams with not as big of a brand don't end up being hurt by the committee's bias. But right now it's a problem in college football, and I just had to talk about it. Let me know. Leave your guys' opinions down below. This was a strange video, more of just a rant. If you're here through the end, I thank you guys for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe. Until next time.